All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast. I'm Victoria Taft, and I have with me today a person who has been an inspiration to me through years and years and years of either watching on the outside or being an activist or being a podcaster. Cleta Mitchell is the real deal, the gold standard of all things elections, and being a person who's an excellent advocate. In fact, she's routinely chosen as one of the best lawyers in the country. And you can get that and be a great advocate for your clients. That's a pretty good thing. Among her clients is, I'll just play one here for you.
In nearly 2 decades of running our small business, my husband and I never dealt with any government agency outside of filing our annual tax returns. We'd never been audited. We'd never been investigated. But all that changed upon submitting applications for the nonprofit statuses of True the Vote and King Street. Since that filing in 2010, my private businesses, my nonprofit organizations, my family, and I have been subjected to more than 15 instances of audit or inquiry by federal agencies. In 2011, my personal and business tax returns were audited by the Internal Revenue Service, each audit going back for a number of years. In 2012, my business was subjected to inspection by OSHA on a select occasion when neither my husband or I were present, and though the agency wrote that it found nothing serious or significant, it still issued fines in excess of $20,000. In 2012 and again in 2013, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms conducted comprehensive audits at my place of business, and beginning in 2010, the FBI contacted my nonprofit organization on 6 separate occasions wanting to call through membership manifests in conjunction with domestic terrorism cases.
Yep.
They eventually dropped all matters and have now redacted nearly all my files. All of these incursions into my affairs began after filing applications for tax exemption. There is no other remarkable event. There's no other reason to explain how, for decades, I went unnoticed, but now find myself on the receiving end of interagency coordination into and against all facets of my life, both personal and private. Bear in mind, distinguished ladies and gentlemen of this subcommittee, these events were occurring while the IRS was subjecting me to multiple rounds of abusive inquiries with requests to provide every Facebook and Twitter I'd ever posted, questions about my political aspirations, and demands to know the names of groups that I'd spoken with, the content of what I'd said, and everywhere I intended to speak in the coming year. The answers to these sorts of questions are not of interest to the typical IRS analyst, but they are certainly of interest to a political machine that would put its own survival against the civil liberties of a private citizen.
Ain't that the truth? Cleta Mitchell is the senior fellow with the Conservative Partnership Institute, the Election Integrity Network, Who's Counting.us, as well as being the chairman of the board for the Public Interest Legal Foundation. And we have J. Christian Adams on quite a bit. Cleta Mitchell, welcome to the Victoria Taft Show and the Adult in the Room podcast. And I just want to ask you, things haven't changed much, have they, since that comment in the congressional subcommittee?
Well, that was in I want to say 2014. It might have been the summer of 2013, but I think it was 2014, because the Obama IRS, the Obama administration, started targeting the I represented about 10 or 12 organizations that were conservative or Tea Party groups, and Tea Party, the King Street Patriots was one of those. True the Vote was the C3. King Street Patriots was the C4. And so we saw all of that targeting, hundreds and hundreds of citizens groups from across the country. And when Catherine was going through those questions that she was asked, I have to tell you, every organization, every citizens group was given a similar questionnaire to complete and return to the IRS if they wanted to get their tax exempt status. So that was going on in it started really, I first noticed it in 2011. And then it's, maybe 2010 even, but then 2011, 2012, 2013, in May of 2013 is when Lois Lerner admitted that indeed they had a be on the lookout list for targeting conservatives. So yes, that goes back, that's 10 years ago, more than a decade ago, the last time the Democrats held power. And then when the Democrats came into power again, we see that they did the same exact thing.
Did worse to President Trump. But let's go back. I don't know if Becky Gerritsen was your client, but this is an iconic speech from a similar congressional hearing.
In Wetumpka, we are patriotic Americans. We peacefully assemble. We petition our government. We exercise the right to free speech. And we don't understand why the government tried to stop us. I'm not here as a serf or a vassal. I'm not begging my lords for mercy. I'm a born free American woman, wife, mother, and citizen. And I'm telling my government that you've forgotten your place. It's not your responsibility to look out for my well-being and to monitor my speech. It's not your right to assert an agenda.
Yeah. Every once in a while, I will take out Becky Gerritsen's that vignette of her speech, and then I bring out Andrew Breitbart's war cry, and I just get pumped up because I'm a born free American woman as well. And you were right there from the jump, Cleta. Whatever happened with those cases?
Well, interestingly enough, there was a class action suit that had been brought, I want to say in 2014, that had all of the different organizations. I sued, on behalf of True the Vote, we sued the IRS over the specific treatment that had been meted out to Catherine Engelbrecht, True the Vote, and King Street Patriots. And then I want to say it was about 6 months later that there was this class action suit that was filed on behalf of all of the groups. And that would have been in 2014, 2015. And of course, the Department of Justice Civil Division fought that with every fiber of their being. And that was brought in Cincinnati because that was the office that was supposed to oversee the exempt organization's applications.
Cincinnati office screwed up.
After, I'll tell you an interesting story about that in a moment. But after President Trump was elected, we had taken the case that we brought against the IRS was filed in the District of Columbia. And then that was dismissed after 2 years, and by Judge Reggie Walton, who's been one of the judges who has been so terrible to the J6 defendants, I might add. He's a district court judge in the District of Columbia. It went up to the Court of Appeals. Dr. John Eastman argued the appeal successfully. It was remanded to the District of Columbia Federal Court for discovery and to determine to conduct the trial. Meanwhile, President Trump was elected, and I was invited to a meeting with the new Attorney General nominee, Jeff Sessions, who I'd known from his Senate days. And so I was in a meeting with him, I want to say in February or March of 2017 at the Justice Department. And as I was leaving, he was talking to me, and I said, at that time still Senator, you need to tell your civil division. And True the Vote was not part of the class action. And I said, so I didn't feel like I was having an ex parte communication. I said to him, you need to tell your civil division to settle these IRS cases. And he said, what? I said, you need to tell the civil division of the Department of Justice to settle the IRS cases. All those Tea Party groups, all of those conservative groups that were targeted, settle the cases. Settle the case. There's a class action. I gave it all to him. I took a binder to the meeting to give to him. And then he said, and then shortly thereafter, those cases were settled. And they all got some money, certainly not enough to compensate them for everything they'd been through. Many of the groups by 2017 had disappeared because they could never get their tax exempt status. But So that is what ultimately happened. I don't think I've ever told that story before, Victoria. I don't think anybody knows that I had anything to do with getting those cases settled.
I remember a guy, in fact, from the Oregon Tea Party who was harassed by the IRS as well. And I didn't find out until later because he was silenced. He was put in a lockbox. His voice was removed because they were told not to say anything. And he was afraid that indeed his group would suffer worse consequences were he to say anything. And that was another game they played with these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Scaring
No,
them.
it was pretty terrible. It was really terrible. And I had been practicing in this area, practicing law in this area for many, 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 many years. I'd never seen anything like it.
And yet the government was weaponized against all of these people. And we've seen nothing but this kind of activity since the years Barack Obama brought that weaponization of government. I'm sure that somebody's done it previously, but Barack Obama brought that weaponization of government on a continuous basis against his political opponents.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
To silence them for the 2012 election.
Right. And it worked.
It
did. Then Kim Strassel wrote a really good book about all of that, which is worth reading. And then, but then they did it. They just expanded what they were doing. When you get to COVID and all of the silencing of normal people, anybody who raised any questions about COVID, not to mention the government-funded silencing during the election if people were asking questions about the election process in 2020. So they're good at this. They're totalitarians. Let's remember that. The left equals totalitarian. They cannot help themselves. This is what they do.
So you were involved in some ways with the 2020 attempt to find out what had happened. But tell me, you've personally had some of your hide taken out of you by the 65 Project people.
Oh, yeah.
They've gone after you hammer and sickle, which used to be hammer and tog, but it no longer is. And so tell me, do you mind telling me what's going on with that? Because I know they started after you in 2022. What's
Well, no,
the
what
update?
happens with me was that I was asked by the White House. I was actually in Montana for the 2020 election because I represented, I did campaign finance and political law, which includes representing nonprofits and helping people start nonprofits and that kind of thing. But so I represented Senator Daines, who's the Republican senator from Montana and the state Republican Party. And so I went to Montana. I was literally leaving Montana, heading back to my home, get ready to fly home. And I got a call from the White House asking if I would go to Atlanta and just they wanted somebody on the ground that they could talk to about what was going on there. This was the morning after the election. So it was November the 4th. And that was the morning. I said this year, that on the morning of November 4th, the election integrity movement was born, because that was the morning that millions of Americans woke up, having gone to bed thinking that President Trump had been reelected and waking up the next morning to find that no, he hadn't. And so I went to Atlanta, and it was pretty clear to me once I got on the ground there that there were all kinds of things that had been done in the election that simply, were violations of state law. So you had all these categories of votes that had been cast in violation of state law, but they were counted, they were included in the certified results. And so what we ended up doing was filing an election contest under state law. Every state has a process for that. It's set forth in the statutes. And so we filed on December the 4th because it's not easy to do that because you have to get all of the data. You have to allege there was this violation, there was this violation, there was this violation. You cannot just make general assaults on the election process. You have to show it tied to a particular vote. And so we had 30 categories of illegal votes that we found. And we filed a 64-page complaint, election contest, with over 1,100 pages of documentary evidence. and verified affidavits of either fact witnesses or expert witnesses. And the most amazing thing happened in all my years of practicing law. I had never heard of this before. We did not get a judge appointed to hear the case who was eligible to hear the case. I mean, there was somebody appointed, but under state law, that judge could not hear the case. It had to be a judge appointed from another county. And that judge was not appointed. We didn't get word of a judge being appointed for a month, even though it's supposed to be a statutory, expedited measure. That's right. That's right. So we never, when they say President Trump lost all of his election filings after the 2020 election, well, he didn't lose ours because he never got a day in court in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think a lot of those never had the fact patterns looked at by a court. They were either dismissed for lack of standing and or stuff like that happened to you guys.
We never got that far. We never got that far. Yeah. It was crazy. It was crazy. Okay,
so now, I mean, in retrospect, you're the only one I've been able to ask really, what happened in 2020? Is it easier to see now because of the election laws that have been changed since then, and we can compare and contrast? Or is there something that's still sticking in your craw that you go, we really need to fix this?
Oh my gosh, there are so many things. There's so many things that need to be fixed. So that's right. I have two responses to your question. First, I really was not somebody who thought, I knew that I always just say about Georgia, well, the president would ask me, I really won Georgia by 400,000 votes, right? I would say, Mr. President, we don't know who won Georgia. It was too much of a mess. But I will tell you that, so that there were all of these issues in all these states. And I could go through state by state by state, problems that all the $500 million from Zuckerberg and how that money ran through election offices to increase Democratic voter turnout in big cities and flip a state like Wisconsin. Wisconsin was flipped by the Zuckerberg money. And I could go through a lot of different anomalies and things that shouldn't have happened, and 10,000 ballots in Arizona when they did the audit of Maricopa County, 10,000 ballots that were received that had never been sent. Nobody knew where they came from. The margin in Arizona was about 10,000, just over 10,000 votes. So I could go through each state, but I will tell you that one of the things that has really gotten my attention, and I think many, many other people have seen this graph that shows the historic number of ballots, number of votes for the Democrat for president, and historic number of votes in past elections. And they go along at about, 75, 76. Remember, President Trump got 75 million votes in 2020, the most of any Republican candidate for president in history. But Joe Biden got 81 million.
Because he was so popular.
And now when you look at that, that is at least, I think President Trump's margin, his vote totals are now up to, I think California is still counting.
California's still counting on the day we're recording this.
But I think that I think he's about 76 million, close to 77 million. But I promise you, Joe Biden didn't get 81 million votes. I don't know where those other 5 million votes came from. But I'm sure if we did a real review, we would be able to figure out there were ballots cast in states that did not correlate to the number of voters. There were votes counted that didn't correlate to the number of voters or the number of ballots issued. So no one has gone through, because we've never really been allowed to look at all of that data. And in Georgia, hundreds of thousands of election records were destroyed, even though federal law requires that they be retained for 22 months. So, I just now realize the extent to which I know that I guess I probably have a much better understanding now of why President Trump, who is a numbers guy, why he looked at that number and he knew that number couldn't be right. And in the middle of COVID, Biden campaigned from his basement. You telling me he got 81 million votes? No, I really don't think that's possible. So
you were on that infamous phone call that is probably the outgrowth lawsuit from which will probably be kicked very soon. And So,
Well, I hope it is. It's crazy.
yeah, it's pretty crazy. I understand that there was a recent hearing in which they were going to look at whether or not Fani Willis was, she needs to be removed from the case.
Right.
Disqualified from the case. And that's gone by the wayside. They just canceled that right prior to us discussing this, as a matter of fact. But I do wonder about that. Now, I could see, because I've seen the media do this to President Trump multiple times, over and over and over, taking sentences out of context and then say, they did the impeachment based on a sentence that they reworked into something that they made malicious or something. And that was erroneous, as we found out. Now, what about that phone call? The perfect phone call.
As I mentioned,
the other perfect phone call.
Right. And he has said that to me, President Trump. That was a perfect phone call. It's maybe not so perfect, Mr. President, but maybe we shouldn't have that phone call. But as I mentioned, we had not been able to get a judge appointed for a month. And the electors from Georgia were getting ready to be certified in 3 days or 5 days. Let's see, it was on the 2nd of January. So, 4 days. And so we had made every overture possible to the Secretary of State for a month, saying, there are these problems. There are these anomalies. We need to sit down and discuss this. And of course, Brad Raffensperger was such a darling of the left-wing media that he was being just heaped with praise, and he's like a puppy getting his ears scratched, and he just was preening for that. So he would not meet with us. He would say, your data is wrong. That's what we would get back. And we would say, that's what we want to do, is to sit down and compare our data, our 1,100 pages. We have all of these illegal votes and voters who we know should not have been able to vote, but their votes were counted. And we finally we're saying, look, if you're right and your data is correct and ours is wrong, show us, and then we'll tell everybody, okay, our data is wrong.
Save everybody a lot of headaches.
Right,
John Eastman might still have his job by now.
Right. But if you're wrong, then you need to do something, because you are in charge of the elections and making sure they're conducted according to the law. Well, he would never do that. And so finally the president, in the phone call, the president says, we just need to find 12,000 votes. And so the media, of course, the crazy left-wing media, takes that completely out of context, as though the president is asking Raffensperger to manufacture 12,000 votes. No, we already had way more than 12,000 votes. We had the names of the voters. We had their addresses. It was all in our public filings. He didn't have to do anything except sit down and compare data. If you listen to the entire phone call, that is exactly what was agreed to by the end of that phone call, but which after the phone call, then they never did. They just released the transcript and the recording of the phone call because it was secretly recorded, I think illegally, by Jordan Hughes, who at the time was in Florida, which is a two-party consent state.
Yes. Whatever happened to that?
Well, she was granted immunity by the special grand jury in order to testify because she had broken the law. And my view is the entire grand jury originated from that phone call. So why is all of everything that came from that phone call not what we would call fruit of the poisonous tree? But anyway, that's where that came from. But the point was, we had ample data showing that the election had been marred by irregularities, improper votes, et cetera. And in Georgia, as in most states, if you can show that there are more votes that were cast in violation of state law, you don't know who they voted for. But if you just can show that the illegal or regular votes are in excess of the margin between the two candidates, then there's a new election. And Georgia was getting ready to have another election on January the 5th.
Is that the Senate one? The Senate seats? Mm-hmm.
2 Senate seats. They could have easily had the presidential on there again. I know it's unusual, but they could have done that.
So I do want to find out what dog in the fight, if you will, the feds have in conducting integrous elections that are free from fraud, if you will. And so I want to get to that eventually, but I do want to find out, okay, so then, all right, 2020, 2024, what was the difference?
Well, I think a major difference was that thousands and thousands of people after 2020 came out of the woodwork and said, we want to learn about this. We want to know how they make this clock. We want to go to our election boards. We want to watch. We want to be there. And you cannot imagine. I mean, that's what the Election Integrity Network has been all about, is to train people, to give people the tools so that they can oversee the election process in their own communities, in their own counties, in their own cities, in their own states. And we now have experts, citizen experts all over this country, people who know better than the election officials what the state's laws are, what the procedure is supposed to be, how elections are supposed to be run. They know more about about what's wrong with the voter rolls than the election officials. And so I just think that while it has driven the left crazy to have all of these people out there engaged in the process, and in fact, I have been just completely castigated and browbeaten because I had the temerity to say we need to organize citizens around this country. We need to arm people with tools and information so that they are empowered to oversee elections. And it's just like parents figuring out they needed to be at the school boards. Citizens need to be at the election boards, because you know who's there when we're not, who's always there, who's been there for 30 years? The left-wing groups, the League of Women Voters, this group for this, this voting advocate and that voting advocate. And they had that feel to themselves for decades. So they have not been happy. They have not been happy about having all of us deplorables swarming the election offices. But I think that made a huge difference. And the fact that so many people filed things, they filed complaints, they filed comments, they were saying they knew what had happened. They filed FOIA requests, they looked at data, they looked at documents, and they didn't get everything. Like I said, a lot of records were destroyed. But it was as though all of a sudden we're shining a light on you people. You can no longer conduct these elections in the manner in which you have become accustomed, where you can just kind of do whatever you want. I'll give you a good example. Fulton County, Georgia. It was a mess in 2020. It's still a mess. But I'll tell you what they did not do in 2024. We had a fabulous Republican member of the board there who asked a lot of questions, sued them, been all over them, wanted to know a lot of things about what vendors were being allowed, who was being allowed in the election office, etc. You know why she asked all those questions? Because we learned after the fact, after 2020, that the ACLU had been allowed by Brad Raffensperger to bring lawyers and ACLU lawyers and plant them in election offices all over Georgia in the key counties, advising as to how to basically avoid signature matching. The legislature,
really?
The ACLU was there. We found other left-wing groups had been in these election offices, basically given carte blanche to sit there and know everything that was going on, make decisions, have access to the computers.
They had access to the computers?
Actually, put data, and then putting data on their own laptops.
What?
Oh, yeah. That didn't happen in 2024. It didn't happen. It happened in 2020. It did not happen in 2024. Yeah.
Can you finally put to rest the story? I think it was already, settled and whatnot. The women with the suitcases, 2020 in Fulton County, the women with the suitcases, and you could see them after they closed the offices, they pull the suitcases out, etc. Those are the people that got after Rudy Giuliani, right? Are those some of the ladies who took him for everything he was worth because he maligned them because apparently Yeah. So what,
Well,
what was the story
well,
there?
here's the fact. I mean, I have watched this videotape repeatedly, and here are the facts. At about 10 p.m. on election night, November 3rd, 2020, the election workers at the State Farm Arena told the media and told the observers, we are through for the night. You can go home, come back in the morning. And you can see on the videotape how they go out, one of them goes out and talks to the people who are standing there watching, and then they all start packing up, and you can see them filing out. Then about 10:25 p.m., you can see them start to process ballots again. And they pull these cases out from under the tables, and they take what are clearly ballots out, and they take them and they start running them through the tabulators. And that goes on beginning about 10:25, 10:30 p.m. That goes on, and nobody else is there except the workers, which is a violation of state law because all of that is supposed to be done in the presence of observers and the media. That is not allowed to be a closed process. And that goes on until about 11:50 p.m. So for about an hour and a half, hour 25 minutes, there's nobody else there but the workers, taking ballots and processing, running through the tabulator. And so then a guy comes in, wanders around about 10 till 12. He wanders around and he gets on his phone and he calls somebody, and then he is talking on the phone while they're still processing ballots. And then he wanders around. There may have been another person who came in, and they keep doing all of that until about 12:15 or early in the morning of November the 4th, and then they stop. Now, the so-called investigation conducted by the FBI, would you like to know what that consisted of?
Oh, God. Was it like hiring, what was that crazy outfit that they hired, that Comey hired for the DNC, quote unquote, hack? Something like that. One of their friends.
No, this was even worse than that.
Oh,
they
Lord.
had the FBI and either the assistant U.S. attorney or the FBI testified before this at the Senate Senate committee after the 2020 election, that they had investigated, they had looked at everything, and they had concluded, wait for it, that these were not suitcases.
Oh.
These were bins.
Oh.
That was it. They did not even address the fact that why did they tell everybody to leave? Why did they start tabulating again? Did they, the entirety of their investigation was to determine whether these were suitcases or bins.
Who tasked them with that stupid outcome?
I presume Bill Barr.
Oh, God.
I presume.
Oh, bless him.
Bill Barr. But
Wow.
the first morning, the morning after this videotape was released, Brad Raffensperger his first explanation was, oh, they weren't tabulating anything. They were just getting ready for the next day. Except that all you had to do was look, and you could see, well, they're running ballots through the tabulator. We can see that. So then he changed it to that he had people there the whole time watching from his office. Well, that guy doesn't show up until 10 till 12. They've been tabulating, as I mentioned, for an hour and a half. And so that was his second explanation. His third explanation, which is what he said on 60 Minutes and in his book, was that the videotape was heavily edited. Well, I have watched the whole videotape from the 2 hours between 10 p.m. and about 12:30 a.m. So I've seen it. It wasn't edited. But
wasn't that like CCTV with timestamps on it?
It was a CCTV. I don't recall that it had timestamps on the screen. I don't recall that. I can't remember. But
no jump cuts, no nothing.
You know what? But it may have. But look, I mean, the point is, It was the Secretary of State's office or the people at Fulton County told them to start tabulating again, even though that's against the law. They should have said, well, you shouldn't have sent anybody home. You should have asked us before you did that. But now that you've done that, you can't start again because it's illegal to process these things in secret. And there were depositions, by the way. I don't remember who it was, but this is another long story. But
I'm here for it.
In 2021, there was another lawsuit that was filed to get a declaratory judgment to order Fulton County to follow the law, which may sound like you shouldn't have to do that, but that was, and it went, and they had already started discovery in this case, including deposing those workers who had been there that night and confirmed that, yes, indeed, they were running ballots through the tabulator, yes. And so the question that the attorney asked was, it appears that sometimes you were running the ballots through more than once. And so one of the people who was on the videotape, and I don't remember which one it was, said, well, yes, it kept jamming. And so he asked how many, so they went through the videotape and she testified, yes, I had to run some of them through 9 times. And so he asked, how did you know that those weren't actually counted when you ran them through that many times? And I don't remember her having it. I don't remember who it was, but admitted, yes, we ran the ballots through multiple times because it kept jamming. This is why you have observers. This is why you don't do those things behind closed doors. But anyway, and then we know that Fulton County did ultimately have to acknowledge that there were at least about 3,200 ballots that were run through and counted twice. They've admitted that. Now remember, this is in a state where the difference is 11,779. So they've got at least 3,500 ballots that had been tabulated twice. So it was a mess. It was a mess.
So, I mean, that's got to sting. And then 65 Project came after you.
Well,
like they did
first
so many
came
others.
after me was the Lincoln Project. They came after me first. The day that the Washington Post published the article and released the video and the transcript. The audio, the phone call and all. And the fact that I was on the phone call and there are other lawyers on the phone call. So the Lincoln Project came after me and came after me at my law firm. I ended up resigning my partnership of 20 years. And, but look, I mean, it was infuriating. However, I think that God had other plans for me. And I always say that the left thought they'd vanquished me. But that really freed me from billable hours so that I could just spend the next 4 years doing nothing but working on election integrity, which is what I started doing. I joined the Conservative Partnership Institute in Washington on February the 1st, and I've never looked back. And I've been working on trying to fix our elections ever since, because while we've been out living our lives, the left has been like a bunch of termites in our election process, eating away at the fabric of securing our elections. And it's not easy to try to reclaim it, but they've claimed a lot of territory, and we're working hard on reclaiming it.
Well, they're fighting for democracy.
No, they're not. Whatever. They're fighting for power. This is
yes,
AKA power.
Yeah, that's a lesson that you've learned over these years. It's really, it's just about power.
It's about their power. Mm-hmm. But
go ahead and expound on that if you don't mind, to talk about their ill intentions.
Well, all of it. I mean, I really believe, so one of the things I realized in the early part of this year was when I started putting all these things together, I realized, oh my gosh, we have this very porous system in elections, from registration to voter rolls to ID to voting by mail, all of these things. And then I realized that there's this very well-funded Capital Research Center estimates that between 2012 and 2020, that these left-wing groups raised and spent between 11 and 14 billion, that's with a B, dollars, changing our election system. And so all of a sudden I thought, if you couple that with a complete breakdown and enforcement of the immigration laws, so now you have these millions of people coming into our country who are not citizens, who we as taxpayers are paying we have paid hundreds of billions of dollars through the State Department and other agencies, to these left-wing groups that then shepherd these groups of migrants all over the country, settling them in various communities. And the Department of Homeland Security says, oh, we don't know where they are. Nobody knows where they are. We don't know who they are, where they are. Well, then you get into a situation like in Wisconsin, where your driver's license, you cannot, it looks exactly the same as the card that is issued to an illegal. And so I started really focusing on the threats of non-citizen voting. And so we did everything we could to raise as much visibility of this threat as we possibly could, because we needed people to know that this was what they had in mind. I think that that's what they had in mind as to how they were planning to steal this election, was through the non-citizen voting. And of course, that really made the left-wing media's heads explode, because I was talking about all these, the threat of non-citizen voting. And so, I mean, but here's the point. It has taken many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people be paying attention to this, paying attention to the election process, realizing that there's more to elections than campaign ads and direct mail and showing up and voting, that we have to be there 24/7.
Yep.
Because the left is there 24/7.
Now, some people. Oh, go ahead. No, please.
And well, no, just that we have to be there. We have to. It's like being a parent. You have to be there. You just have to be there. You have to be watching all the time. And I used to tell my daughter, I may not know today, I may not know tomorrow, but I will find out. And I would find out things, and she would say, how did you know that? I said, I told you. Yeah. I told you. But that's the way we have to be as citizens. We have to be so engaged in the process. And now what I want to have happen as we pivot to 2025 and 2026, Congress has got to fix the laws that it has passed that have broken our election system. And the states need to fix their laws. And we just need to have a massive citizen demand that we have to have voter ID. We have to have only citizens voting. We have to have get rid of this, ballot dumping after Election Day, and ballots being received for 2 weeks after the election. We have to secure the identity of everyone who casts the ballot and make sure that they're properly registered. We need to get the federal government rules that prohibit states from cleaning their voter rolls for most of the 2-year cycle. Get rid of that. And we need to get rid of any insecure technology that people don't have faith in. Anything that can be remotely accessed or programmed or reprogrammed. And all of those things we have to have, I think a voter's Bill of Rights that is designed to restore confidence in our elections. And it's the responsibility of the federal government and the states. And my view is Congress has broken a lot of this over the years because Republicans don't pay attention to these laws. And it's time for now Congress to fix it, and states as well. So that's what I think we're going to really be focused on the next 2 years.
And you're just the person to do it.
I'm just the person to do it.
I mean, I have 1,000 questions for you, but I know we're bumping up against your time with us today, and I'd love to have you back. So I'd love to do it.
I'll be happy to do it. As soon as we have our voter Bill of Rights and everything, then we'll come back. I'll come back.
I have one addendum, though, just real quick,
right.
And that is you're talking about the illegal aliens voting in the election. And some people will say, well, how would they have been able to vote in the election? They blah, blah, blah. That doesn't matter. You don't need a person to go along with a generated ballot. Just saying all the NGOs know where those people are. All the NGOs,
Correct.
the leftist NGOs that she was just talking about, they are the ones that know what the address is for those people because they've placed them there. All they want are the ballots. And my guess is, am I pretty much right on the money there?
100%. 100%.
I'm thinking that they in the places that the NGOs have placed people. You're going to find 80 people living in one apartment. And,
or one
whatever.
soup kitchen that's not even a residential address.
Well, that's right. And what Christian Adams and your organization at PILF found out, people calling vacant lots their home or a bar their home. That happened a lot in Nevada. And boy, Nevada's voting ranks really need to be culled. My God.
Well, it's terrible because one of the problem you have in Nevada is that you have hundreds of thousands of bad registrations on the voter rolls. And the problem is that when the Democrats took control of the Nevada legislature in 2020, so 2021, first thing, they passed a law to send a ballot, not an application, but a ballot to everyone on the voter rolls. So you've got ballots going to people getting 2 and 3 and 4 ballots.
I still get my California ballot. I refuse to take myself off the rolls. I just want to see how long it takes them.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is insanity. Well, in Los Angeles, Judicial Watch sued Los Angeles County and finally got an agreement. And it turns out that they admitted they had not removed anyone from the voter rolls since the early 90s.
Oh, my gosh.
Early 90s. This was only like 2 years ago. So, that's a big problem. These are all a big problem.
California reorged its voting ways of voting. Seemingly good enough for a lot of people. Some folks I know who thought it was real good, solid. COVID comes along, they throw everything out the window. Then they send out universal mail-out ballots to be mailed in. And where do you think most of those ballots are voted? Los Angeles County, where there's people that you can impersonate the individual voter. It happens all the time.
All the time.
Cleta Mitchell.
And so, these are things that, and when we start trying to talk about just common sense remedies, they say we're racist and vote suppressors. Well, what I finally said to one of those left-wing reporters is, he said, you're just a vote suppressor. And I said, I would like to suppress illegals voting. Yes, you are correct about that. I want to suppress non-citizens from voting. I want to suppress anyone who is not a legitimate, eligible citizen from voting. So I don't think if that's the accusation, I plead guilty.
Yeah.
Because I want to suppress illegal votes.
They just hope that sounds scary to people. They don't want that. Yeah. Not at all. Well, Godspeed.
They want as much chaos as possible. But we're onto them, and we have a lot of work to do. So,
we're behind you. We'll do whatever you need us to do. Thank you so much, Cleta Mitchell.
You. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen. And give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1A Cast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.